Hi everyone, welcome back. So let's just jump right into it. All right, in the beginning, as we know, God created the heavens and the earth. Everything we can see, the stuff deep under the ocean that we can't see, He made it all. And then everything birds, fish, animals. And then one day He's like, something's missing. So He creates a man, Adam, in His own image. So kind of looks like him. Gives Adam all the animals, Adam names them, and then God's like, he seems lonely. It's not good for man to be alone. So he puts Adam into a deep sleep, removes one of his ribs, and makes a woman, Eve. Wakes Adam up, is like, oh, good, I have a partner, I have a helper. So together, God says, everything that you see here in this Garden of Eden, it's a perfect paradise that God created. Everything is here for your use. You have dominion over it. It's in your charge. So everything's perfect for a little while. Like God walks with them and it's just really cool. Until one day, the serpent, who is described as being cunning in the Bible, the devil is in a serpent form, goes to Eve and he's like, "Hey, how you doing, Eve?" And she's like, "Yo, pretty good." Um, like, yeah, God made you something pretty cool, except what about that tree over there? Because, oh, what I didn't mention, they're allowed to eat anything in the garden except the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's the one thing they cannot have access to. Um, and Satan was like, because oh, yeah, let's go back again. Also, all the angels were there too, these celestial beings, and Satan, Lucifer, which his name means like light bringer or something, which sounds good, but he has an ego, he is prideful, he thought he was as good as or better than God, and that's just not the case. So he fell, he was kicked out of heaven, and he was like, well, if I'm going down, I'm taking as many down with me. So he has some other fallen angels that are with him, and he's like, well, I'm going to take these people out because he didn't like how much God loved Adam and Eve. So he goes to Eve and is like, what about that tree? And she's like, yeah, I'm not allowed to eat that. And he's like, why? Because then you'll have all knowledge of good and evil. You'll be like God. That happens throughout the Bible. People tried, but that's not a good thing. So Eve is like, you're right, yeah. So she foolishly eats the apple, and then she gives it to Adam, and then Adam eats it. And then all of a sudden, everything changes because that was the one rule, is you can't eat from that tree, but they do. And then they, for the first time, realized they didn't have any clothes on. So they went and hid themselves and were like sewing leaves together to try to cover themselves. And then they heard God like walking in the garden, like, Adam and Eve, where are you? And they're like, they hid because they were embarrassed. And then when he saw them, he said, well, what's wrong? And they're like, well, we were naked, so we hid. And he's like, how did you know? Did you eat of the tree? And they were like, yeah. Eve blamed the serpent. Then Adam blamed Eve. And God's like, okay, well, I'm going to put enmity between you, the serpent, and your offspring and hers, and curses the serpent. And then basically, because they now did this one thing they weren't allowed to do, they are then barred from the Garden of Eden. They get kicked out. So that happened. And then they have kids, Cain and Abel. Oh yeah, and then God's like, you're gonna have a hard time having kids, and says to Adam, it's gonna be hard for you to grow food. It's not gonna just be everywhere like it's been before. So life's now hard for them, but God's still taking care of them to a degree. So they're out of the garden, they have kids, Cain and Abel. They fight a lot. Cain kills Abel, not a good thing again. Then they have more kids, including Seth, who's an all-around good guy. But despite Seth and their other kids being all-around good people, as humanity over generations, as humanity tends to do, people started behaving badly. They were doing things they weren't supposed to be doing, things that God told them not to do. And next thing you know, almost the entire world is populated by evil. So God realizes, I gotta just destroy everything. But then he looks down and he's like, well, there's one, the way the Bible says it is, he had favor. How did I wrote it down? He found grace in God's eyes, a man named Noah. So God's like, oh, hey, Noah, you might want to build a big boat, an ark. Here's how many cubits to make it, here's how to make it, how big to make it. You're going to make this big old boat, and you're going to put at least one male and one female of every animal. Some animals more, some less. No, none less, though. Of every animal and insect and not fish, but because they can swim. Everything is going to go on the ark with you because I'm going to flood the whole world, but you'll be safe. You and your kids and your sons and their wives, you will be safe. So can you imagine, like, how much people in town were probably making fun of him as he's building this boat while nothing's happening? But Noah's like, okay, yeah, of course, God, do whatever you say. So he builds this boat, brings the animals in 2 by 2, and then all of a sudden, when the ark's completed, it starts to rain. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and it floods the entire earth to the point that everything dies. All the evil people, the animals that aren't on the ark, everything dies. So yeah, it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and then that water covers the earth for 150 days. After that, God remembers them, brings in a wind, and it dries up the water, and the ark is landed on the top, near the top of Mount Ararat. And they're kind of chilling there, but there's still some water. And so Noah starts sending out birds. He sent out a dove to see if it was safe to leave the ark yet. Dove flies around for a bit, but then comes back, and then he sends out a dove again, like a week later, and the dove comes back with an olive branch in its beak. And that was the sign that it's safe to leave. So they leave, and then this is when God makes the first, well, I guess the first would have been Adam and Eve, but that got broken. But he makes a covenant with Noah, he puts a rainbow in the sky. That was his promise to Noah, that he would never again, and Noah and his children and all the generations, promised he would never again flood the whole earth. He would never again destroy the whole earth with a flood. So cool. So all's good. But then, a couple generations later, people start getting up to no good again, and everybody spoke the same language, and they were like, hey, let's build a really tall building, and maybe we can build it high enough to actually reach heaven. And they start doing it, and God's like, no good, don't like this. So how did he stop? He stopped them by making them all speak different languages. It's called the Tower of Babel, because they could no longer communicate because they all spoke different languages. Time marches on, and there's a guy named Abram. And God says to Abram, hey, why don't you leave your homeland, and I'm going to make you and your children many nations, a great nation. So Abram and his wife, Sarai, they're like, all right, so they head for Canaan. Then during this time, there's a famine in Egypt. They left Egypt with a guy named Lot. Remember him? Abram and Lot are like on good terms, so they reach a point where they're going to split off, and Lot goes east. Abram goes west. Lot goes east towards Sodom. Then God talks to Abram again. He says, your name is now Abraham. So Abram becomes Abraham, and he's pretty old, and his wife's pretty old. But God says, hey, you're going to have a son, and his name is going to be Isaac. And they're like, okay. Like, the messengers from God are telling him this, and Sarah overhears it, and she's laughing in the tent. And they're like, why are you laughing? And she's like, I didn't laugh, but she definitely did. But the joke was on her because, when God says you're going to have a son, you're going to have a son. But in the meantime, before this baby is born, remember Lot over in Sodom, he gets there, and it's filled with very unrighteous people. They are not acting how they're supposed to act. They're doing terrible things. And God says, hey, I got to destroy this entire city. But Abram, remember his buddy lives there. And he's like, but what if there's like 50 righteous people there? Would you destroy it even though there's 50 people? And God says, no, I would save it for that many. And then the number keeps going down. What about 30? What about, 20? And God said, I won't, but for that many people, righteous men there. So God sends messengers, a couple of angels, to Lot and tell him to get your family and flee, because God's going to send, fireballs to destroy this entire city. So Lot and his wife pack up, and they just leave their home. And the instruction from the messengers was, once you flee, you cannot look back. Like, do not look backwards, just move forwards. Unfortunately, on their way out, as Gomorrah is burning behind them, Lot's wife turns around and looks back, and she turned into a pillar of salt. She's just a salt pillar now. So Lot continues on back to Abraham and his family. So again, Sarah laughed, but joke's on her, because she gave birth to a son. They named him Isaac, and this was their only son. Until one day God's like, hey, Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, take him up this mountain and sacrifice him, make him a sacrifice. And That was heart-wrenching because this is your only son, but Abraham's not going to disobey God, so he takes his son up this hill. But before he can bring the knife down on his son, an angel stops him and says, because you listened to God, this reaffirmed the covenant with him. So it's all's good again. Then Sarah dies, and it's time for Isaac to get a wife. So he marries a woman named Rebecca. Then Abraham dies. Then Isaac and Rebecca have 2 sons. They have Esau and Jacob. They were twins. Esau was like the hunter, and he had a lot of hair, big body hair all over him, and he was Isaac's favorite. But Rebecca had a soft spot for Jacob, who was more of an inside kind of a guy. He would like to be inside the tent. So the time came, not yet for the blessing. So one day Esau, who was a hunter, he came back and just been outside working in the fields all day, and he's exhausted, and he's like, I'm about to faint, I might die. Please feed me, Jacob. So Jacob brought him food, but said, if I give you this, you have to give me your birthright. Esau went for it. He said, okay. So then he ate and he survived, but now he lost his birthright. So then Isaac is old, and he's basically blind. And he's I'm about to die. Send me my son Esau, my eldest son, who's his favorite, Esau, and I will give him his blessing. But Rebecca is like, I like Jacob more. I want Jacob to get that blessing. So she prepares a meal the way that Isaac would think that it had been Jacob. So she prepares a meal, and she gets like furs and stuff and puts them on Jacob so Isaac wouldn't realize. So Jacob goes in, says, I'm Esau, and then he gets the blessing from Isaac. And then when Esau finds out, he's livid. So Jacob has to flee the area. So Esau wouldn't kill him. Rebecca said, run away, go hang out with, I have a brother, go to his house, stay there for a while. It'll be safe there. So he does. So he leaves. And when he gets to this area, he meets a lovely young woman named Rachel, who just happened to be his mother's brother's daughter. His cousin, we don't do that anymore, but it's biblical times. So he loves her instantly. Goes to her father, his uncle, like, I want to marry her. And he's like, well, work for me for 7 years, and then I'll give you my daughter to be your wife. So he works for him for 7 years, but on the day, the uncle is like, actually, I'm going to give you my daughter Leah because she's older. I can't give you Rachel, the one you wanted, because she's younger. I can't do that. But if you work 7 more years, you can have both, which again, we don't do that anymore. That's New Testament. Where in the Old Testament, that happens sometimes. So he works for him 7 more years. Now he has 2 wives, sisters, Leah and Rachel. He prefers Rachel, but Leah's cool too. So Leah has a bunch of babies. Rachel struggles to have kids. Where was I? I'm looking at my notes. Right. So eventually Rachel does have kids. She has a baby named Joseph, who we'll hear about soon. And once Joseph was born, Jacob asked his uncle, can I take my wives and everything that's mine, and can I move into my own land? So they pack up and they start to leave, and along the way, Jacob sees an angel of God. He asks for his blessing. They wrestle through the night. And because he would not let go of the messenger from God, without a blessing, he was given a blessing, and his name is now Israel. So Jacob is now called Israel. After days of longer than that. After traveling, Jacob hears that his brother is coming his way, so he's like, "Uh-oh, Esau is coming. Let's try to send goodwill his way so he doesn't get really angry and kill me." But he does. He meets up with him, and Esau runs to him and hugs him, and he's happy to see him, and not what you would expect the reaction to be, but it was. Then Benjamin. Rachel bears another son named Benjamin, but then she dies. So Joseph is arguably Israel's favorite son. You should probably remember at this point. He gives him the coat of many colors. Joseph is having these dreams about his older brothers, saying like, I have had a dream that you're going to bow down to me someday. And naturally his brothers aren't too thrilled about this. So one day when they're all out in town, they're like, well, we can't kill him, but maybe we can just sell him into slavery. So they sell Joseph into slavery. And then they just tell their dad, they tell Israel, oh, he was mauled by an animal, he died, oh, sad, when they'd sold him. So Joseph gets sold into slavery, he ends up in Egypt. And all's good at first, but then Pharaoh's wife takes a liking to him, but he does not return those affections because she's a married woman. But then she gets mad and has him thrown in jail. So he's in jail, and it comes out that he can interpret dreams. Again, because he's been interpreting dreams all his life, usually his own. And one day Pharaoh has some dreams, and no one can interpret them until someone remembers, oh, there's this guy in prison. He can do it. So they bring Joseph to Pharaoh. And he said, your dream means there's going to be 7 years of famine, or 7 years of abundance, and then 7 years of famine. So to store up everything during those good years, so we have plenty of food during the bad years. So Pharaoh's like, oh my goodness, you're the best, and makes him like his right-hand man, and says like, everyone has to listen to you. You listen to nobody except me. So Joseph went from being a slave and then in prison to like number 2. So it's all good, and then the 7 years go by of abundance, and they store up the grains. And then the 7 years of famine start, and people from other surrounding areas start coming to Egypt to buy grain and buy food. And lo and behold, guess who shows up? His brothers that had sold him in the first place. So they don't recognize Joseph at first. So he puts them through some tests until eventually he'd had enough, and he's like, brothers, it's me, Joseph. And they're like, oh my goodness, he must be so, you must hate us. And he's like, no, I don't hate you. Much like when Esau didn't hate his brother, Joseph said, if you hadn't sold me, I would not have ended up in Egypt. I would not have been able to interpret Pharaoh's dream, and we would all be starving. So again, not how you would expect the reaction to go, but it was great. All right, so Joseph did that, and then Pharaoh's like, yeah, bring your whole family here, bring everybody. So Joseph brings his whole family to Egypt. They live in great conditions. It's fantastic. Then eventually Jacob/Israel dies, and then Joseph dies, and some generations pass, and no one remembers Joseph. You have a new Pharaoh, and this Pharaoh is very cruel to the Israelites that have been now living in Egypt for generations. Pharaoh looks around and realizes there are more Israelites than of us, so we need to enslave them and make their lives very difficult because we don't want them rising up. In fact, right now I want all the midwives to kill every Israelite baby boy so they don't get more numerous. So a woman, an Israelite woman, a Hebrew woman, has a baby boy, and she can't hide him anymore. So to save his life, because she knew that Pharaoh would have had him killed, she put him in a basket, floated him down the river, and Pharaoh's daughter finds him and saves him. He's raised in Pharaoh's household. This is Moses again. He's raised in Pharaoh's household, but he always feels this kinship with the Hebrew slaves because he knows he is one of them by birth. So he does what he can to protect them. Sometimes gets himself in a little bit of trouble, but one day he's out walking in the desert, and he comes along this bush that's on fire. It's on fire, but it's not burning. There's flames all through it, but it's not on fire. He doesn't understand it, and then he realizes it's God coming in the form of a burning bush to talk to him. So he approaches, and God's like, take off your sandals, because where you're walking is holy ground. I am, when Moses said, what can I, who can I tell the people you are? He said, I am that I am. And by the way, you're going to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And Moses is like, what are you talking about? How am I going to do that? He said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. You're going to go back and you're going to tell Pharaoh to let your people go. And he's going to say, absolutely not. But I'm going to send a bunch of plagues if he doesn't listen, and it'll be fine. You'll be able to leave. So Moses goes back, tells Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, absolutely not. But then Moses does these like signs and wonders. His staff turns into a serpent and back. And then God sends all these plagues. Do you remember there were like frogs and fleas and locusts, and the water turned to blood and all this stuff. And Pharaoh would always after say, like, no, okay, I'll let you guys go, just stop this plague. But then he would change his mind until the final plague, it became the first Passover. The Lord said to Moses, what I want all of your people to do is to get an unblemished lamb, just like we talked about last week, a perfect lamb to be a sacrifice in this first Passover. What you're going to do is take the blood of that lamb and you're going to put it on your doorpost. And that will be the sign to have your household passed over. And as long as you do that, your family will be safe. If not, every firstborn in the land will die tonight. That goes to the firstborn of the animals to Pharaoh's son. So this happens, and Pharaoh's, grief stricken, and he says, leave, fine, Moses, get your people, get out of here. So they pack up and they start to leave, and then Pharaoh changes his mind. They chase after him. They're crossing the Red Sea, and the Lord, through Moses, parts the water, and they're able to walk on dry land across the sea. But then the water's coming on Pharaoh's men, and they're free. It's a lot. So you still with me? We're 21 minutes in. Okay. So the Israelites are now out of Egypt, and they're headed for the promised land that God first promised to Abraham, or Abram, way back when. So they start wandering, and then, like people do, they started to complain. They complained a lot about everything. And then they would complain, and then God would get upset with them and frustrated and angry with them for their behavior. Then Moses would plead on their behalf, and then God would forgive them, or at least let them continue. Things that happened. Water, they didn't have water, and then the Lord brought forth water from a rock for them. Things that don't happen typically in nature. And then one day Moses goes up the mountain, because God says go up Mount Sinai, and to come get the law from me. So Moses goes up the mountain, gets the 10 Commandments, comes back down and finds everybody worshiping a golden calf. They had melted their gold down and made this like calf, idol, god, fake thing. He's livid, he smashes the tablets, melts down the gold, puts it in the water, goes back up the mountain, gets the 10 Commandments again on the new tablets, comes back, and they're on their best behavior again. But then they start complaining, and God sends them manna, and then they need water again, and this time they get it from a rock again, but this time Moses messes up. He doesn't do it as well as he did the last time, because God told him to just command the rock to bring forth water, and Moses struck the rock with his staff, and then the Lord said, you will no longer get to enter the promised land because you didn't listen. Then there's some concerns and some, like, the Lord's leading them through all these battles, like, go take this people's land, then go here, do this. Everything that the Lord says, he's leading them as a cloud in the day and or smoke in the day, and then like fire by night. Like, he's leading them clearly, and if they do what he says, then it all goes well. Then there's a bunch of people that in the Israelite community that lose their faith. They don't believe that God can protect them for this next trial, and they go out and they disobey. The only two that don't disobey are Joshua and Caleb. So after this, God says, all right, well, we were about to get to the promised land, but now you need to wander for 40 years in the desert, because everybody except for Joshua and Caleb, everybody has to die before you can enter the promised land. So they have to wander and wander and wander until eventually everyone has died except Moses. And then Moses gets to look over the promised land, but he doesn't get to go in. Then he dies, and Joshua gets to lead everybody into the promised land. And that is where Deuteronomy ends. I hope that was a semi-brief wrap-up. If you have any questions, just watch the other videos where we actually went through each part. But the highlights: Adam and Eve, then their sons, Cain and Abel, his son Seth, Noah and the ark. Yeah, these are the big highlights. Adam and Eve, first people. They sinned, got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Sidebar, I always think that's interesting. You know, people say, well, if God was such a good God, why didn't he just create a paradise for his people? He did. He did create a paradise for us. We chose chaos. I digress. So Adam and Eve, first people. Then Noah flooded the earth. Noah and the ark because everyone was evil and wicked, and God flooded the earth to take care of that, except Noah and his family. Rainbow covenant, that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood. He was very specific there. Then we have the Tower of Babel, and then we have Abram, who became Abraham. His son was Isaac, and then Isaac's son was Jacob, and Jacob's son was Joseph, who went to Egypt and saved everybody from the famine. And then later on came Moses, who got the Israelites out of Egypt and back on track to get to the promised land that God first promised to their ancestor Abraham. So those are the first 5 books of the Bible. Hope that wasn't completely all over the place. Hope that helps. And on that note, let us bow our heads and say the Lord's Prayer. All right. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, hope you have a great week. I will see you next Sunday, and we will begin the book of Joshua. Okay, bye-bye.